Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And this is Peter Robbins, and the show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. You are watching or listening at KGRA Digital Broadcasting. To watch or listen live, just go to KGRA DB every Monday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time and click on live stream at the top of the page, and you are there. No monologue tonight. My guest, well, our time's going to go quick enough. My guest is Linda Cortile, which is a pseudonym for the central figure in the late Budd Hopkins' remarkable book, Witnessed, the True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abduction. This is the first time in years that Linda has agreed to do any interview for broadcast or print or what have you, and all the more reason I want to thank her for joining us tonight. The book Witnessed documents Hopkins' 6-year-long investigation into what is rightly regarded as one of the most controversial and best documented UFO abduction cases of all time. Linda Cortile, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Well, thank you, Peter, my good friend. We've been friends for over 30 years.
It's true. And having you on as a guest tonight has made me face the fact that I'm in a unique situation as an interviewer and program host. Although I've done hundreds of interviews in my work as a writer, and close to several hundred in the time I've done this show, this is the very first time that I find myself with a guest whose story I am so caught up in historically, and who I have such a long and in some ways complicated relationship with, and over the fact that the case itself, even in the world of UFO abductions, is often by people who have an opinion, but not an informed opinion. And when I say that in this case, I mean having read the book, dismiss it as it's just too unlikely. This is just, I'm sorry. It's okay to be taken by aliens, but not in this way. This is just pushes the envelope too far for me. I'm only half joking, and you know that. In the interest of full disclosure, for years, maybe a dozen years or so before Linda came into Budd Hopkins' life and my life de facto, and for the 6 years that Budd Hopkins investigated the case, which was 1989 until 1995, and then for another 5 years after, I was Budd Hopkins' research assistant, gopher, proofreader, head of filing, occasional witness, phone answerer. I worked this case for 6 years with Budd. I have an acknowledgement in the book, and if I want to make myself really look good, I'll read part of the inscription Budd put in it to me to establish my bona fides. But before anything, I want to read most of a letter that is from Timothy Good. Timothy, I guess starting certainly in the 1980s, and well into last 10 years or so, is probably the most respected and best known UFO researcher in the UK. And he wrote this letter. It's dated the 7th of August, 1996, the year the book came out, and it's on his stationery. Having read carefully through about 400 pages of this new book and skimmed the rest, I have no hesitation in recommending it for publication by Macmillan. It is absolutely gripping, providing new and profound evidence in the search for proof of alien abductions and their purpose. I have much admired Budd Hopkins' pioneering research over the years and can vouch for his integrity and objectivity. His books, Missing Time and Intruders, are for me the definitive works on the abduction phenomena. Others in recent years, notably Dr. John Mack, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, have published books on this controversial aspect of the UFO subject, but I found none of these as compelling as witnessed. Hopkins breaks new ground by revealing in great depth the details of an abduction that occurred near Brooklyn Bridge, New York City, in November 1989, observed by a number of witnesses, including a former Secretary General of the United States, the so-called Third Man, and his security guards, with whom Hopkins remained in communications for several years as he continued to investigate all aspects of this bizarre case. What impresses me in particular is the thoroughness and objectivity with which Hopkins pieced together the evidence, never jumping to conclusions, but always allowing for a wide range of hypotheses to account for the polluted information provided to him by the key players, all of whom were seriously traumatized by their experience. The principal abductee, Linda, for example, not only had to endure abduction by aliens, but kidnapping by the security guards who themselves claimed to have been abducted with her at the same time. That's a lot. And I wanted to begin with that letter and record because, again, it's wonderful to have an opinion, but especially in this case, I think it's necessary to have an informed opinion. We're going to be here almost 2 hours, and we're only going to touch on aspects of this sweeping story. It is a 7-part book, again, covering 6 years. And I joked with Bud over the years, Linda, you may feel the same way, that if he had not gone into being an artist, if he, say, had gone into law enforcement and become a detective, God help the criminal element of New York City. He was the best self-trained investigator I ever knew in my life.
I agree. Totally.
With that as kind of preamble, Linda, let's go back to the beginning, before any of this stuff. Where were you born? And tell us a little about your family.
Well, I was born in New York City, downtown Manhattan on the east side, near the East River, in Little Italy. And my father, he was a longshoreman. My mother was a wife and a mother.
Mm.
And I had an older sister, 8 years older than me. And so when I was 8 years old, she was 16 and out with her friends. My mother was always busy cleaning the house, preparing for dinner, preparing for lunch. Um, I went out with my little friends, but on rainy days, it was kind of lonely because my sister was out with her friends and she was older than me and a teenager.
Sure.
So what I did was I made an imaginary friend. And his name, I named him Mickey. And you would figure that for a little kid because of Mickey Mouse.
Mm.
So I just named him Mickey. And I would talk to Mickey all the time. And that was the end of that. I grew up. And of course, I forgot about Mickey because I was a teenager. and had my own friends and my own fun. And that was the end of that.
Let
Brooke,
me interject for a moment. Is it fair to say that looking back on it now, because we know these other intelligences, one thing pretty much everybody agrees on once they really look at the data that's out there, they can affect our perceptions. They can make us forget certain things. They can make us think that things happened in a way that maybe they didn't. Sometimes these screen memories wear off or not. But is it fair to say that you thought you had created this imaginary friend, Mickey, as opposed to that you had created this imaginary friend, Mickey?
sure, that's very possible.
Yeah.
Very
Continue
possible.
on.
But it wasn't easy because strange things used to happen uh, in the apartment. It was the four of us, my parents, my sister,
Yeah.
and I.
Yeah.
And my mother used to call Father Dominic to come and bless the house about every 3 weeks
Wow.
because we used to see things. So Father Dominic would come, he would bless the house, but it didn't take any of the spirits away. We thought they were ghosts.
When you say you and the other members of your family would see things, give us an idea of what you're talking about here.
Well, we thought they were ghosts,
Hmm.
no spirits. They were white, they were little, but who knows what people look like in a different dimension.
Sure, sure.
So we
You
just we chalked it up as ghosts, spirits.
you both of your parents emigrated here, or were either of them born here?
They were born here, but their parents were immigrants.
Yeah, like my family.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned Father Dominic. You had, we all grow up in different ways in different lives, and many of us are almost archetypes for a certain kind of person. You were born in Little Italy. The Italian American culture is so in your blood, and the key neighborhood in the United States of America, where Italian immigrants came, their dreams started to mature. They stayed there. They moved out. The church was a very important, is an important part of your life, but kind of in an old-fashioned way. In my thinking, what are your earliest memories of church and knowing that this is part of your tradition?
Well, every Sunday we had to go to church, and all the children had to sit together. It was 9 o'clock mass,
Hmm.
and the nuns were there, to make sure we behaved. One of my memories is we were in the first row, so the pews in front of us had the usual people that came to mass, and there was one woman who used to wear a hat that had vegetables and fruit on it, and a little bird sitting on top of a stick in the center of her hat. And every time she moved, the bird would sway back and forth. And every Sunday, you would think that the funny part of it would have worn out after all those years. But all we used to do was laugh. And one Sunday, I was sitting at the end of the pew, and a nun came along with a rolled up program
Oy.
and popped me on the head. And so we had to be quiet. But that's one of my fondest memories.
So you grew up associating this small bird on the hat with Jesus.
I have no idea. It just looked so funny. Every time she moved, the bird did too, but very fast. And we just used to crack up.
As a kid, we grew up in such an amazing era of music. The pop songs that we used to listen to, the songs on the street, the songs that we associate with our childhood, and just form that soundtrack. Um, there came a time when you were a teenager and you were a singer. Um, you were in a girls' group and you were good and you were approached to go professional. Can you tell us a little about that?
Oh, that's something I'll never forget. Well, um, should I mention the name of the group?
Absolutely.
Okay. I was the lead singer of the Angels. And I was 14 years old.
And what was their huge hit?
Pardon me?
What song of theirs might we remember? Those of us old enough to remember?
Well, the songs that I recorded with them, because with my being in the group, it didn't last long. It only lasted 2 months. And I'll tell you why. It was in the summer, school was out, and we were supposed to do a tour. So the girls, the other two girls were much older than me. So my mother had told my manager that she wanted to come along. So the manager says, fine, as long as you pay for your own travel expenses,
Uh-oh.
Hotel and all of that.
Yeah, a chaperone for a 14-year-old is not inappropriate.
Right. So, but in those days, it was different. Today, you can't do that. Today, a parent is welcomed. Anyway, so my mother said, well, we can't afford that, to travel across country for 2 months. She says, the girls are older than my daughter, and when they go out at night, what's my daughter supposed to do? Sit all alone in a hotel room? So he says, she could go out with them. My mother says, but she's not allowed to date until she's 16. Well, anyway, my mother got furious. And my mother says, well, if I can't chaperone my daughter's not going on tour.
And that was that.
And that was the end of that. So my mother breached the contract because I wasn't allowed to sign the contract. I was under 21.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the Angels. But I went out on my own. It didn't work out that well. And I tell you the truth, I did get tired of it. And so I used my skills, everything I learned in school. I became a stenographer.
Yep.
I was a private secretary. And I did fine.
Linda, by this time in your life, you're a young woman, certainly independent. You are, you're both very feminine, very streetwise. You're in both worlds. And had you ever consciously given a thought to UFOs, flying saucers, beings from other planets, anything like that for any reason, even in passing that you can recall right now at that point in your life?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, ironically, I used to hear about it every now and then just by accident. And I used to laugh at all the people that said they were abducted by aliens. It used to crack me up. And as far as the existence of UFOs, I always felt there might be a possibility, but I didn't actually believe it. I wanted proof.
Good point. You get married,
Yes.
fairly young, and you start a family.
I was 25 when I got married.
Very good. And Johnny is your oldest?
No, Johnny was the baby.
Oh, right. You have 2 sons, and you're living in an apartment that we both remember well. You a lot better than me, down by Pier 17 and the beautiful Brooklyn Bridge. What happened to give you the first indication that something was going on in your life and that had been going on in your life, that had kind of been background noise on a certain level, but it was becoming clearer? Or what do you think was the trigger, or what's your first memory that I've got something I need to look at here and maybe deal with?
Well, when my firstborn, Stephen, was born, when your new parents, you take pictures and you're so proud of your baby. But I noticed that all the photographs that we had developed, uh, it made my nose look crooked on one side. So I
Hmm.
thought it was the shadowing
Right.
or something. So one day I looked in the mirror and I put a finger on each side of my nose, and I realized there was a lump
Yeah.
on one side of my nose. Not a great big lump, but it terrified me because I thought, it's possible it's a tumor.
Sure.
And with the tumor, and if God forbid if it was a malignancy,
Yeah,
well, that's right square in the middle of my face.
that's right. More
So I,
logical to think that than something wild and fantastic.
so I made arrangements to see a specialist, and I went to the doctor. And the doctor says to me after he examined my nose, he says, "Oh, he says you had nose surgery."
Oh, same thing my sister was asked.
So I said, "I've never had nose surgery before." He says, "Well, you have a scar on in your nose, on the wall of the nose." I says, "Well, I've never had surgery." So I says, "Well, maybe that scar, maybe it happened because of my fingernail. Maybe a fingernail made that scar." And he just looked at me straight in the eyes and he said, "No," he says, "it was made with a scalpel."
Hmm.
So I went home, made a lot of phone calls to family to ask them if I've ever had nose surgery
Yeah, little
uh,
girl.
when I was very, very young, and maybe
Yeah,
that's why I don't remember.
yeah,
And they all said no.
of course.
Well, a few years later, I went to a bookstore
Hmm.
because I wanted to buy, what was her name? Kelly. I forgot her name.
Oh, the one who wrote the biography on Sinatra?
Kitty
Kitty
Kelly.
Kelly, right. Okay.
I wanted to buy her bestseller, The Unauthorized Biography of Frank Sinatra. So I'm walking through the book aisles. I found the book. I was
Hmm.
so happy that I was able to pick it up
Yeah.
because it was the only one left. So I decided to browse, and I came across a book only because it popped out at me, The Intruder's Book. So I looked at it, and the book didn't have a UFO on it
That's right.
or any. It looked like a forest with lights behind the forest, and I thought to myself, "Oh, this looks interesting. It looks as though there might be a garage light on someone's house who's hearing an intruder
Yeah.
especially because of the title of his book." So I
Logical.
purchased it, and it was a small book. So when I went home that night, I read that book first because it was smaller. Kitty Kelly's book was like 500 pages.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get past the first chapter
Uh-huh.
when I read about Debbie, Debbie Cobble at the time,
Yeah.
uh, who had a mysterious nose surgery.
Yeah.
So I put the book down. I felt very weird, and I just let it go. And after a few months, I decided to write. to Budd Hopkins, publisher, to tell him what had happened when I read the book and certain things that I saw as a younger person. And I mailed the letter, and he called me, and about 2 days after I mailed the letter, and I felt so flattered, but at the same time, I said to myself, why is he calling me? Because I had found out the book was about alien abductions. So Budd and I made arrangements to meet, and we did.
Linda, you mailed that letter in the spring of 1989?
Yes.
Okay.
March or April.
Because by that point, part of what I did for Budd, his mail had just gotten too much for him to respond to on his own. So I would open the letters and I would read the letters, and he worked out this really simple code on the outside of envelopes. It could be a star, a circle, a line, or whatever. It all meant something. But there were letters that were 3-star. And for me, it was stop what you're doing and bring this letter up to the deck. Bud did his work in his studio on a little balcony. We'll see a picture of it later. And he read the letter. I read that letter first and gave it to Bud. It's just another connection between us. Obviously, I didn't meet you until later that year, but that always stayed with me. That letter stood out. Let me put it that way. Before we go on, for those who are not familiar with Budd Hopkins' name or are, it's important to have either a little crash course here or to refresh your memory with who this person is, because he plays such an important part, obviously, in this story. Budd Hopkins, and I'm guessing he was certainly younger than this when you met him, but he was, in his time, the best known UFO person in the world, certainly after Alan Hynek died. And Budd was really the pioneer of the scientific study of the abduction phenomena. His two best-selling books leading up to Witnessed, these two, and they're both brilliant. But for Budd, this was not what he set out to do in life, although he became more famous for it than anything else. Budd was an artist. As a child, that's what he wanted to do. He graduated with his BFA in the late 50s from Oberlin College, moved to New York to follow his dreams as a painter. Here's him, early 20s. Studio. Again, a young painter. And over the years, went from being a traditional late period abstract expressionist to obviously moving into a form that was more his own. And not just paintings, sculptures, often from wonderful aged pieces of wood found on the street. But his work, again, evolved over the years, as artists do. And particular favorites of Linda and mine, his wonderful Guardian series, a couple of shots of his studio. And just to note that when Budd died, the New York Times devoted 2/3 of a page to his obituary. That's something that's almost never the case unless you're a movie star or a very famous politician or a variation. And 2 photographs, I was really pleased that they had enough knowledge about him and respect to refer to him by his first love as a painter. And they do reference the subject of his UFO research twice in the article. And it's respectful. Anyway, that's quick background. And Linda's and my stories are kind of welded together. And just briefly here, this is Budd about 1976 or so when I met him. And this is Budd with one of countless newspaper articles about his work. He's holding here a drawing, as you can see, of a little girl and two beings. This is one of those original drawings, and the person that did them, I guess technically you could say, was my first case, although I would never use that word, my late sister Helen, who was very close to Linda as well. A shot of Budd and I from, I'm always really proud of this because it was an 80s episode of that great Robert Stack, I'm blanking, show. And we'll all think of it in a moment, or you guys already have. 1994. And about a year before Budd died in his studio in 2009, a candidate of us at an International UFO Congress. And this wonderful zany area is just a catwalk above his studio with an opening onto the roof that became a big part of our lives over the years. But that is just a little background on Budd Hopkins. So you meet him, and how does he begin to look into what might be going on with you, and his thoughts about what had happened in your nose?
Well, he thought it was very interesting, and he just wanted me to talk about part of my childhood, and and what I thought it might be in my nose, which I had no idea because I hadn't read the rest of the Intruders book.
Sure.
He didn't say much to me about other cases or other people that he was, researching and investigating. Good. But he did ask me if I was willing to be regressed through hypnosis. And I sort of frowned on that.
What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I said to him, well, will I be aware of what's going on around me? And he said, yes. I says, if you ask me to cluck like a chicken, will I do that? And he said, no. So I agreed. And he regressed me, Peter.
Yes. And then you come out of the regression. It's been audio taped. How is Budd with you at that point? And are you curious to listen to the tape, or you want to hear everything that you said from him, or you're just fine not knowing, or where were you at that moment?
Well, I knew what I had said was, though it was shocking to me, I told him under hypnosis that when I was a little girl, I was looking out the window in the evening and I was listening to the rock and roll singing groups in the neighborhood who used to stand under streetlights and harmonize and sing. Great. And their black leather jackets were shining in the street lights. But my attention focused on the rooftop across the street. And there I saw what looked like to me, and I told Budd under hypnosis, it looked like a Christmas tree or a top, one of those twirling tops.
Sure. That triangulates down. Yeah.
Yeah. In lights twirling around the rooftop. And so that was the end of the hypnosis. So, I kind of, I wish I could have seen the expression on my face, because consciously I didn't remember that. And Budd didn't say anything about alien abductions before the hypnosis, or even anything that had to do with UFOs.
Yeah.
Good. And I hadn't finished reading the book because it frightened me and puzzled me.
Yeah.
So I just looked at him and I says, what was that? So then we went upstairs, and he explained to me what it might have been. And I went home feeling kind of strange,
Yeah.
a little confused too.
Sure.
And by the way, when I went to the nose specialist,
Yes.
it was so bizarre to me that I might have had a nose surgery that I didn't even know about,
Yeah.
that I saved the receipt from the doctor's visit.
Interesting.
Excuse me the way I'm talking. I'm getting over a cold.
That's no problem. It's one thing I'm very thankful for about you as somebody in your position. You save things, and some of them have never even come to the surface yet, and in their time may. But you were so helpful in being able to flesh out the story with real bits of things to connect you to those moments and times and the like. So at this point,
Well, you
um,
know what it was, but I didn't want. But I'm sorry, I called
yep.
you. But
No, that's okay.
I didn't want him to think I was crazy, so I brought the receipt from the nose specialist
Good.
because I didn't want him to think I was nuts.
Yes, understandably.
So yeah, that's why I save things. I kind of figured I needed some sort of evidence.
So time passes. Again, your primary responsibilities. You have two growing sons. You have a husband that you love. You've got a household to run, family, things to do, church. Um, what is the next thing that happens that kind of jars you or brings you into a deeper awareness that something more has happened here?
Well, in I met Bud in April 1989.
Right.
Um, so it was a few months later. It was in November 30, and I got a phone call. That day was an awful day. I got a phone call from Mother Superior. My youngest son was going to receive his Holy Communion.
Yes.
But before you can do that, you have to have your first confession. So what happened? He was standing on line in church next to the confessional,
Right.
and the priest is in the confession booth. And they all had to go to confession for the very first time
Mm.
so that they could receive Holy Communion. So I don't know, I didn't know at the time that he had plans.
Mm.
He wanted his best friend's lizard, his pet lizard. So John told his friend, and he was about 6 years old. He told his friend, I'll bet you that I won't get any Hail Marys for penance after I tell my sins. What 6-year-old is going to have, sins anyway, but okay. So they made the bet. So it's John's turn. He goes into the confessional. The priest opens up the tiny little door and he asks John to tell his sins. So he opens the little door and John said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." And squirt that priest right in the face with a water gun. The priest shut the door, that tiny little door, very fast. He ran out of that confessional like a bat out of hell and tried to get John out of the confessional, but John was holding on to the little knob on the inside. I'm laughing now, but at the time I was furious at that boy. Well, anyway, they got him out. Mother Superior had gotten word of what had happened, and she came into church, and according to John, she grabbed him by the collar and the back of his neck and dragged him into her office. So I had to go to school. And I don't even want to tell you what I did to John when I got him home. I wanted to string him up on the wall. But no, I didn't string him up. I grounded him. Anyway,
He needed a sin.
yeah, he sure did. Oh, by the way, he did get that lizard. He didn't get one Hail Mary to say. No penance.
And a lizard. This is a pretty
And
good deal. I need to look
yeah,
into Catholicism more.
so I guess he wanted that lizard very bad. Anyway, we get home, but the day before,
Right.
I went Christmas shopping because it was like 1 week after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So I left all the shopping bags hidden in the master bedroom. And so, I go home, and it's November 29th, and I do whatever I had to do in the house, and I went to bed. It was kind of late, maybe a 2:45 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I get into bed, and my husband is asleep. He used to work nights, but he had jury duty, so he was home. He had to take off from work for jury duty.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I hear the plastic shopping bags rustling. So I thought it was John. So I said, John, is that you? And there was no answer. So I closed my eyes. I said my prayers. And in the middle of the Lord's Prayer, I get this strange feeling of numbness coming up from my toes. Now, I've been feeling that for years, every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
So, and and I had spoken to Budd, and everything. So I knew what that meant. I was afraid to open my eyes, Peter. But I did.
Hmm.
I had to know because I had to protect my family.
Yes.
There was this creature, which I had never really seen before, not even when I was a child. They looked like ghosts to me.
Yeah.
There was one creature at the foot of my bed. There was another creature on top of the bed, and boy, he was light, but he was crouched, and one on the left side of me. So the creature that was on top of the bed that was crouched. I took a decorative pillow I had behind the pillow I was sleeping on.
Yeah.
And I figured I better do this now before my whole body becomes numb. So I reached behind me. I'm still in the laying down position, but I picked up my arms, grabbed the pillow, and I flung it at the creature that was sitting on the bed.
Yeah.
And he fell back. By that time, after I threw that pillow, I had gotten numb. And I was trying to call for my husband, who was sitting right next to me.
Yeah.
He didn't answer. Well, I knew he was switched off. They call that. Yes.
That's right. It's
The next
part of
thing-
the pattern.
That's right. The next thing I know, I feel pounding on my back. And I saw white fabric pass over my eyes. And I thought that might have been the curtains on the bedroom window. And then that was that. The next thing I remembered, I at one point I couldn't breathe for about a split second. And then I was outside my window. And I couldn't move. I still couldn't move.
Now, I want you to stop a second here. When you say, first, when you use the word creature, is that a term that you would now apply to what is usually called a gray or
Well,
something?
at
Okay.
that time, I didn't know what to call it. But
Yeah.
today, this day and age, I would say it was a gray.
Okay. Next question. When you say the next thing you know, you're outside of your window, you're at the time, your apartment was on the 10th floor, as I recall?
The 12th floor.
12th floor. You're on the 12th floor, but you're now outside your window.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember looking down or immediately thinking, I'm cold? I wasn't cold a moment ago. How did I get here? What is going on in your logical mind?
Well, I couldn't move, so I couldn't look down.
Yeah.
But I knew I was outside the window. And so I felt that I started to move up almost like in an elevator.
Mm.
And then I was able to move my head, but I couldn't see outside of the bright blue light. And the bright blue light looked foggy, like being in a nightclub and there's all this smoke around when we were all allowed to smoke, in public places.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was able to move my head, so I looked up, and it looked as though I was moving up into a volcano.
Oh.
So and that's what happened, being outside the window.
Do you remember anything beyond that consciously at that moment?
I remember some consciously walking through a long corridor, and I do remember a door, but it was a sliding door, and there was liquid on the bottom of it. I don't know what that was. It could have been water. I don't know what it was.
Sure.
And the next thing I remember is leaving, and I felt something or someone pull me. We found out later on the door closed on my nightgown. And when I went to walk forward, it pulled me back.
Mm.
And that was that.
And next thing you know, you wake up in your bed again, remembering some of this or not?
Oh no, I remember I was dropped into my bed. Now, I don't know from what height. It could have been 1 foot, 2 feet. It could have been from the ceiling. I don't know, but I dropped into my bed.
Wow.
The first thing I did was shake my husband, and he wouldn't wake up. So I went into my children's room, and I started to shake them, and they wouldn't wake up.
Right.
So I was terrified, heartbroken, all the mixed feelings. So I grabbed a compact mirror, and I put it under my youngest son's nose.
Yeah.
And it fogged up, so I knew he was okay. Then I went to my oldest son and did the same thing, and so they were fine. It was horrible.
Yeah. I'm going to cut away here for a moment, Linda. In preparing for your visit here, I've been doing some rereading, even though I was the first person to see these pages of this book literally as they came off the printer. And Budd had a very entertaining habit. You of course remember how the old studio was set up, and the work area in the corner with the two desks, Budd's and mine, facing each other.
Yeah.
When he'd be working on an article or a conference paper or any of his books while I was there, as a page would print off, he would take it off the printer and drop it, and it would float down like a leaf, and it would either land on my desk, the floor, or my head. And it was great fun trying to catch an error. I mean, Budd was the best first draft writer I've ever known. I could rarely find a comma out of place, but when I did, I took great joy in annoying with him with it for as long as possible. But he is a very fine writer. And when fueled with the passion of investigation and details that were real, you know, he was like a rocket. I want to read the beginning of Witness to give our viewers and listeners a sense that this story didn't kind of build up gradually in a way. In certain ways, it hit the ground running. And with that said, I'll also say, again, this is the first page of the first part of 7 parts. And the chapter headings in the first part alone, underneath the FDR drive, confrontation, the tape recording, the third man, seizure and investigation, the April abduction and the third man, search for Richard and Dan, the downtown chase. That said, let me read you something. Outwardly, the envelope was unremarkable, but the letter inside drove a spike through the heart of reason. It was postmarked February 1st, 1991, and addressed to my home. The envelope had been marked personal and important, though inscriptions such as these are not at all unusual in my daily mail. As an investigator of reports concerning unidentified objects, I have received literally thousands of personal and important letters from witnesses and participants in these encounters. But as I soon realized, none had ever conveyed news like this. Quote, "Dear Mr. Hopkins, my partner and I are police officers. We have been in a serious dilemma because of our strict profession and our lack of knowledge on this subject. We didn't know what to do or who to turn to and hadn't done so until recently. We searched the bookstores over and came up with you. There was an address in your book, Intruders, but it was through your publishers. In turn, we let our fingers do the walking through the white pages. Much to our surprise, there you were. We're hoping that you are the correct Budd Hopkins." So here it goes. One early morning, about 3 to 3:30 a.m. in late November 1989, we sat in our patrol car underneath the elevated FDR drive of South Street and Catherine Slip, observing the surroundings around. Sitting on the passenger side of our vehicle, I reached into my shirt pocket for a stick of gum. As I opened it, I looked down at the silver wrapping that was left in my hand and saw it reflecting a firelight type of reddish glow. I looked up through the windshield to see where it was coming from, and there it was, a strange oval hovering over the top of an apartment building. We don't know where it came from. Its lights turned from bright reddish orange to a very bright whitish blue coming out from the bottom of it. It moved out away from the building and lowered itself to an apartment window just below. I yelled for my partner, who was sitting behind me, behind the wheel, behind the wheel, and reached to get a pair of binoculars out of the glove compartment. We grabbed hold of each other and were going to get out of the car, but what could we do for the poor little girl or woman wearing a full white nightgown? She was floating in midair in a bright beam of whitish blue light, looking like an angel. She was then brought into the bottom of that very large oval, about 3/4 of the size of the building across. The poor person was escorted out of her window. I don't know if she was willing or not. I don't think so, because it seemed as though she was being escorted up into this thing by 3 ugly but small human-like creatures, one above her and 2 below. They seemed to be in charge. On top of our fear of getting involved, we were also carrying a load of guilt because we didn't help her and we don't know what's become of her. After she was escorted up and in, the oval turned reddish orange again and whisked away, coming in our direction above us. It must have flown over the FDR Drive while we were sitting under it. It then plunged into the river behind us, not far from Pier 17, behind the Brooklyn Bridge. Someone else had to see what happened that morning. I know what we saw, and we'll never forget it. Mr. Hopkins, the oval never came up from under the river. It's possible that it could have after we drove away about 45 minutes later. We could have stayed longer, but we couldn't ignore our radio call any longer. The guilt is brutal, more than the fear we felt when we were witnessing this terrible encounter. The guilt has lingered into today, and we find it difficult living with ourselves. My partner and I have been debating for 14 or 15 months if we should seek her out. We know the building, and we know which window she came out of. Perhaps she was just a figment of our imagination. If she isn't, if she is she alive and well? We don't know. We're feeling much better now that we have had a chance to tell someone else other than ourselves. We wish to stay anonymous for the time on account of our profession. If we should decide to seek this person out, and she may very well be value her privacy as we do, and we would respect that, we'll contact you again with further information if we do find her, and I hope we'll do. Many thanks, police officers Dan and Richard. I'll read just a few more sentences. My astonishment at reading the letter was all the more profound because I was almost certain I knew the woman in the long white gown whom the officers had seen floating in midair in the whitish blue light beam of light. The name I shall give her here is Linda Cortile. Linda, it's now time for a break, and we'll come back in 4 minutes. This is Peter Robbins with my special guest, Linda Cortile. Meanwhile, Here on Earth is the show. Don't go away.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And we're back. Peter Robbins. Meanwhile, Here on Earth is the show. Linda Cortile is my guest. Linda, at some point, did Budd show you that letter from Richard and Dan?
Yes, at some point.
Do you remember? I know from talks with Budd at the time and you, when we were first starting to getting to know each other, what you had hoped you would gain from your meetings with Budd was to find out, in so many words, what was wrong with you so you could get whatever the prescription was so it would go away. Is that an exaggeration?
Oh, yes. First, I wanted to know what was going on with me. And I had hoped that he could, well, I don't know. I just felt, I didn't feel normal anymore.
Yeah.
And meeting other people who had the same experiences did help a lot. And that's why I went to his support group meetings.
Yes. And we'll get to that in a moment. But at this point, you're not really supported in this, except that, you know, you're starting, Budd and you are starting to have this relationship. Do you remember at what point Budd presented to you maybe that letter, other pieces of information that had started to come to him, letters from other people? As we know, there were a surprising number of witnesses who were willing to come forward and whose accounts are part of the book. When that preponderance of evidence put you in a position where you had to say to yourself, my God, this is really happening? Or, you know,
well, yes, I tried to deny it away. I thought that maybe somebody was trying to play a cruel trick on Budd. I thought it was mean. I thought it had to have been a joke. And so I denied it and kept denying it. But then I had to stop because as the witnesses started to come forward, I knew I couldn't deny it anymore.
Let's set the scene a little bit with a very special piece of architecture for both of us. Brooklyn Bridge, if you're not a New Yorker and you've never visited, is unlike any other bridge in the world. It was the largest suspension bridge ever conceived of when it was built. It was the architectural marvel of its era. To give you a little bit of scale, the stanchions, the two stanchions that we're seeing there, the one on the New York side, stands 28 stories above the water and then down from there. It's a bridge that's been tremendously romanticized. It's been the subject of locations in numerous films, paintings, books, photo essays. I love the Brooklyn Bridge. It's very special to me, but the association with this case is undeniable.
That's right.
And in checking the date on this, Linda, this picture was taken 11 years ago this month.
Oh, okay. I'm wearing my baseball cap. I used to almost dress up looking like a little boy when I left the house after the witnesses came forward and the news found out about it in magazines and radio and, you know, all of that. I didn't want to be recognized.
Yeah.
So I used to take all my hair and stuff it up in a baseball cap, and go outside so nobody would recognize me.
Bridge on the right is the Brooklyn Bridge. The bridge on the left is the Manhattan Bridge, which was the view out of my window for many years when I lived in Chinatown. But let's get to it, Linda. This is the very top of your building. This structure, you'll see variations on this on countless buildings in cities like New York. They're kind of cosmetic
It's a
to
water tank.
exactly, the water tanks under there. This is a photo of the top of your building. I see it looks like there's a penthouse there, but what you were on the 12th floor, was there one floor above you?
Yes.
Okay. And this is the first of a number of drawings. Janet, who made her presence very well known to Budd by writing him and sending him drawings she had seen early one morning, returning from Brooklyn over the bridge, of seeing what was happening. And again, Bud's a public person. His address is post office box addresses in Intruders, among other places. She wrote to him. And what we are seeing directly below the craft is this structure. Also, in all the drawings that Bud started to get, every handwriting or typewriter face was different. Almost all the accompanying letters were handwritten. All of the postmarks were different. And when colored pencils or the like was used by the witness, it was, this is upside down. And there's everybody stand on your head for a moment, please. And if you're on the air, just imagine. Anyway, all of the color sequences were the same from one to the next, as were the shapes. Now, damn, well, I am embarrassed to say I put a number of these in upside down. This is a drawing of Richards, the security guard. And another one of Richards, thankfully, right side up. I'm sorry. This is one of your son, Johnny, on the table in a very, very specific situation. And this is, you tell us about this and how it enters into the story. This is not a toy or a souvenir. This is a very valuable antique 19th century diver's helmet. Would you take it from there, Linda?
Yes. One day, my youngest son was outside. He was going to the grocery store, or perhaps maybe he was bringing coffee to the some of the workers at the New York Post. I think that's what it was. But before he got there, a car window opened and they called him by name. And the windows were darkened. And he said it was an old man sitting in the back, approached him. He stayed in the car, and he mentioned to John that he had a gift for him.
Now, Johnny's a streetwide kid at this point. I mean, this sounds like it could be a setup in another dimension for, some kind of terrible situation.
Well, yes, but Johnny knew that he shouldn't talk with strangers because this is what we taught him.
Sure.
So he backed away from the car.
Yes.
And the older man said, "I have this gift for you." He says, and he opened the door of the car and he showed Johnny this diver's helmet. So Johnny was impressed. So he moved closer. And the older man gave it to him. And I guess that was the end of their conversation. But Johnny didn't know what to do with it. And it just so happened, I don't remember if I was shopping or if I was at work. But what he did was he went home and he hid it in the back of my closet, put all my pocketbooks on top of it. And that was the end of that. And the reason why he hid it, we found out later, because he called Budd Hopkins. And he told Budd Hopkins that some man gave him a helmet, and he didn't want me to know.
Yes.
John didn't want me to know, because we taught him never to talk to strangers or accept anything from a stranger. But he loved the helmet. So
did Budd bring this to your attention?
That's right. So he hid it. So then I find out Budd had to tell me. And, but this is after I found it. I was looking for a certain pocketbook to match the shoes I was wearing that day. And I came across the helmet.
And you knew it wasn't yours.
I says, what is this? I thought I was going nuts, especially with alien abductions. And I says, maybe I am crazy, but I don't know where this thing came from. Yeah. And I certainly didn't buy it. At least I don't remember buying it. And then I called Budd. And I told him I found a diver's helmet in my closet. How did it get in my closet? And I think, I don't remember, it's like over 30 years ago.
Yes, of course.
I don't know if John called Budd or if Budd called to talk with John. I think John called Budd. I think Budd already knew the helmet was in the closet.
I think it's in the book, and I just didn't get to reread that part. Linda, there came a time after this episode that Budd had established, and in no uncertain terms, that the two men that identified themselves as police officers, I guess technically you could say that, but they were a lot more than that. They were the handpicked security detail for the Secretary General of the United Nations.
That's right.
This is a key point that a lot of people go off on. And even people who take the subject seriously, it's like, oh, please, give me a pop star or somebody at a lower level of fame if you want to, spruce up your story, but don't tell me it's the Secretary General of the United Nations. What would they be doing down, at Pike Slip or down at that point in Lower Manhattan at 2 or 3 in the morning? Well, there might have been a romantic tryst going on in this conspiratorial-driven world. Perhaps he had some kind of meeting that had to be in a very neutral, out-of-the-way place at an off hour, or whatever other reason we can think of. But at a certain point, Budd had established, with the help of Dan and Richard, who the third man was. And Johnny wrote a letter, and it says, thank you card. Dear Poppy, thank you very much for the diver's helmet. When I look at it, I think of you. Drawing. Did you know my grandfather in Italy did before I was born? This means that there has been room in my life for a grandfather, someone like you. I hope you feel the same way. I would like to give you a hug, but I can't because you are not here with me. I hope I can see you again. Love, John. Now, what I deduce from that is by this time, John and the Secretary General of the United Nations had met in that brief exchange at the car. And do you remember receiving or Johnny showing you this card, or how did this play into it?
John just wrote it.
And did Budd give him the address, or did Budd send it, or how did this card get to Perez de Cuellar?
I'm not even sure.
Okay.
I'm not even sure. I think he might have sent it. I don't know, because I know I gave it to Budd. Oh, I remember. Okay, here we go.
Mm.
Okay. Later on, Budd met with the Secretary General of the United Nations
At O'Hare Airport,
at
VIP
O'Hare.
room, Chicago. I was
Yeah,
at the office when he got back.
that's right. And he went along with the UPI reporter.
That's right.
He was the bureau chief in Chicago.
And we certainly know his name.
That's right. And Bud had John's letter with him, and I guess other papers.
Mm.
And he met him. He was at the president's restaurant at the airport.
Yes.
And Bud approached him, and the Secretary General was there with his wife, and he packed the seat and asked Bud to sit down.
Yes.
Which I can't understand. If he didn't know Bud, why would he invite him to sit down? Anyway, on the loudspeaker, they had warnings. If you see something, say something. Don't leave your bag.
Well, this would have been pre 9/11, but still.
Yeah. So, no, this wasn't pre 9/11. Yes, it was pre 9/11. That's right.
Yeah.
So Bud sat down at his invitation, and he gave him the package with the papers, including John's little letter.
That's right.
And the Secretary General opened up his briefcase and put it right in his briefcase after hearing all those warnings, at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And Bud spoke to him with the UPI guy. He had a witness with him.
Yes.
And
very important witness.
Yeah, they were asking him questions about his work and everything. And then the UPI guy came up with a question. And every time he questioned the Secretary General about UFOs, the abduction, the Secretary General would just evade the whole subject and talk about Chapter 11 at the UN and what it entailed, and he would go on, and then the reporter would ask him another question, and he would just change the subject. And why didn't he just deny it? If it never happened, why didn't he just say, you know what, this is a stupid rumor, I'm not involved, it never happened?
That's right.
But he didn't, and he never denied it, and he never admitted it.
Also, by this point in the story, for those not familiar with it, the Secretary General and his two security people, along with Linda, had been taken. And there was an episode out on a beach on Long Island that...
Or wherever it was.
Exactly. And I wanted to hear you say what you just said, because, again, this had been prearranged. Bud flew from New York to O'Hare, stayed there just for this, never left the airport, and then flew home. And I was in the office when he got back, and he basically just exploded with a more detailed account of what you've just said, and the reality that the Secretary General of the United States had met with him, did not deny any of these things, but had supplied with him with information that he had been requested indirectly, and the story went on.
And in his future, far out into the future, he never denied it. He would never admit it, but he wouldn't deny it either. So what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that although conflicted, troubled, as I'm sure shocked to his core as anybody is when all of a sudden this is part of their life, he had enough integrity not to lie. He simply did not go into any, details. But we have an image here. And Johnny, of course, enters into this story more than any parent would ever want to even imagine their child entering into it. This is an illustration with a caption from the book. Why don't you tell us what we're seeing here?
Let me see.
Well, the caption says, Johnny's happy sketch of himself, Linda, Richard, and Melody, along with 2 hybrid aliens.
Oh, John used to, what he thought were dreams. See, I didn't talk about this in front of the children.
Of course.
Because I was afraid they'd grow up weird,
Sure.
So, but John started to have dreams that he thought were dreams of a little girl named Melanie or Melody. And they were really fond friends. So it was almost as though he had an imaginary friend in a dream, from a dream. It turns out that he too had an experience, and my oldest son too.
Yeah.
When he was very young, he was about 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah. Next drawing. Oh, good. Upside down. God, I haven't done this since my slide projector days. Johnny's sad sketch of same group after Melody is taken. Anyway, one of the things that I think came through in Timothy Good's letter, that certainly comes through in any of Hopkins' case investigations, is how deep he'll drill down and his due diligence in examining all the evidence as objectively as possible. When one makes a claim that one was on the beach, etc., we have, with a known personage, you look for every detail you can. And was it, again, I only read parts of it. It's funny. Well,
Richard brought back, according to Richard, he brought back sand samples.
Yep. From that beach.
That's right. There were two samples.
Which Budd had analyzed through a laboratory, electric scanning microscope, and compared to sand from the alleged beach. And of course, it matched perfectly. Not all sand is the same, in the same locations, obviously. And
one was refined and the other one wasn't.
Yeah. Linda, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence, physical evidence in your case, and we haven't even gotten into memories from childhood of you and Dan being brought together repeatedly. That was a pattern that really emerged with this case and another one, my friend Matthew Moniz, who was on the show a couple of months ago and had a similar dynamic relationship. But the implant that you had in your nose that was gone at a certain point, how did you become aware that something had happened in that area again?
Well, I wanted to know what was wrong with my nose. I mean, to hear a doctor years before told me I had nose surgery, and I did not.
Of course.
So I wanted to know what was in there. Oh, yeah, it could have been built up cartilage. And it was built up cartilage.
Sure.
From the scar. So my niece is a podiatrist. And she was bugging me for years. Aunt Linda, have your nose x-rayed? No, I just wouldn't do it.
Sure.
But at this point, after finding out what was going on with me, I agreed.
Yeah.
And so she x-rayed my nose and...
Your niece did this. That's important to remember.
Yes, she was my niece.
Right.
And this is the X-ray that came out. I had an object in there.
So
it looked like a backwards 2, and in the circle of the 2, there was a rectangular object within it.
Linda, how would you describe the quality of your relationship with that niece up until this moment in time?
Well, we were very close,
Yeah.
only 13 years apart.
Yeah.
And the case, because she had gotten involved with the case, became overwhelming. She was afraid of her profession.
Yeah.
So no, we're not on good terms anymore. We haven't spoken in several years.
This subject and becoming involved in it, even peripherally, can make people who care about us, who we care about, incredibly uncomfortable, and even more so. And it's no secret that relationships change or are stressed out when one individual has a history like you do. So I remember when that X-ray, and we're talking, a full-size X-ray that goes up on the light box in a doctor's office. I remember when that came to Budd's, and I remember doing just that, holding it up to a light box and my jaw dropping. I had seen a number of implants, the analysis of them, and I had never, ever seen one as complex as this. They don't have moving parts, except that this one did. And it was way up in the nasal cavity. I regret that even with a good publisher, and Witness was published in the United States by Pocket Books, which is a subsidiary of Simon & Schuster, one of the biggest, most influential publishers in the English language in the Western world. And yet the quality of the illustration of that X-ray and the fact that there was no close-up are so tantalizing. But what we see, certainly doesn't qualify as proof, but here it is, friggin' upside down. Okay. Well, this is a first for me. So you should, you're part of that. Anyway, this is so real, and the evidences can be so profound that they're no difference than, in a capital case, if such things were presented in our courts of law. I don't know if a lot of people know, they if they're interested in the subject of UFOs, abductions, they know his books. Maybe they've even read some. Most people are not aware of what an incredibly prolific writer Budd was, not just as an author, but on commentaries, reviews, monographs, specialty studies, special reports. And for many years, we had something called the Intruder's Bulletin. It was never as smooth as we wanted it to go. We had hoped for 4 issues a year smoothly, but it hiccuped along for quite a number of years. And this is all pre-digital, or at the very beginnings. And so much of this material was lost, sadly, because Budd was not a tech person. And these files just have vaporized off the earth. But to give you an idea of just when things were cooking, the variety and unique articles by Budd, by other people in the journal. I wish I had a copy of every single thing that he had in print. I'd hand type them, or at least read them in and scan them. Abductee Concerns, The Valid, the Rare, the Erroneous. Intruders Foundation Special Report, The UFO Phenomena and Suicide Cults, an Ideological Study. A special report, The Ongoing Problem of Deception in UFO Cases. Screen Memories. This was Budd and I counterpoint on reviews for what we had hoped would be a really breakthrough television program. Peter Jennings' UFO Seeing is Believing And as far as abductions went, they basically folded and copped out. But again, the variety of material. And in 1992, Budd, this is still 4 years away from the book, Budd was so excited about some of these hard evidences that were coming up and verifying the individuals who were coming forward who had seen this, like Janet, like Richard and Dan, from different vantage points, from different locations, all of them coming together perfectly. And Budd regretted writing this and a follow-up to it because this is a working paper on things I am developing and evidences I will show. And there's a tradition in America. If you want to become really famous really fast, shoot somebody more famous. It's the way it is sometimes allegorically or actually. And if you can attack somebody well-known, distinguished in the work, whatever your field is, and say, I'm having trouble believing this, and all of a sudden you're a player. And a number of individuals emerge who just became, I don't know, like gnats, like flies. They had found their niche in life, which was to attack this case based on incomplete evidence.
The Three Stooges.
Yes,
Yeah, there was a handful of debunkers. Phil Plath was one of them. The other three, and they said, oh, well, either Linda hoaxed the case or she's hallucinating.
Well, there you go.
I certainly didn't. How could I hoax the case? I would have had to pay off 22 witnesses and keep paying them through the years. Hallucinating, well, then that would mean that all the witnesses saw my hallucinations. But they didn't. At first, it bothered me. Who wants to be called a hoaxer or a nut? Who's hallucinating? Who wanted to be known as a UFO space cadet to begin with? It was humiliating to me.
Well, again, if one wants to come in on the attack, you don't need, to our dear friend Stanton Friedman, don't bother me with the facts. My mind is already made up. And there's no arguing with people like that. Ultimately, though, the book is published and it makes a difference. And
it made a big difference when the Holy Roman Catholic Church got involved. That scared me.
That's right. That's right. And that's a whole nother story.
Maybe for another time, yeah.
There came a time, though, once Budd started working with you, when you joined the support group. It had been running for some years at that point, begun in the earlier 80s. My sister Helen, a member of the original support group, and I don't remember whether she was still actively in the group at the time that you joined it, or she would come and go sometimes. Or the two of you struck up a friendship, through Budd. But I remember how much she adored you and that she loved that you had been lead singer for the Angels. I mean, Helen had quite a musical career, and you two, I mean, on the surface could not be more different people, but you certainly became close in that period. So a couple of pictures to take you down memory lane here, and I'm curious, any thoughts, memories that come up with them. Budd's home, as we remember, was a building on West 16th Street between 8th and 9th. And it became, in some ways, a second home for us as time passed. It's a reminder you can't tell much about a person by looking at them often, or a book by its cover. And an old New York City building, it can be pretty disreputable, but who knows what's going on behind that door. And before Budd had some of the front of the house repainted, this was, nobody's going to bust in there. But little do they know, you go upstairs, and here's a room that only exists in our memory and the memories of other people, Linda, but
That was the smoking room.
I can't tell you how many cups of coffee I had at that table.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd turn around and you'd head down a hallway and you'd come into Budd and April Hopkins and their daughter Grace's living room. And this room that you're seeing right here is the location of the very first UFO support groups ever held anywhere, certainly that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And his great studio. Another shot of the studio. And like most old school painters, a wall or a bulletin board with just pictures that inspire you, interest you, people you like, sculptures you love. It's a tradition that goes back, I'm sure, as far as there have been little papers to stick on the wall. And I don't know if you remember this, Linda, there's so many, it's such a helter-skelter kind of setup in some ways. There was a cartoon pasted to a speaker. And I always thought, just a reminder of Budd's wonderfully dry sense of humor. And it's a alien accepting a major award, looks like an Oscar. And the caption is, "First, I'd like to thank everyone who believed in me."
They're wonderful. But we forgot to mention the motorcade. I know we don't have all that much time left, but
we do. We're still doing fine on time, so get right into that. Let's talk about that.
People from the New York Post newspaper were located right across the street from the apartment building I lived in.
Yeah.
And apparently, according to Richard, one of the intelligence officers, they were in a motorcade with the third man, the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Yes.
And when they got to Catherine Slip and South Street, there was a blackout. The cars stalled.
Yep.
I think Richard said that they were either second or third in the motorcade.
Yeah. Again, this is a small motorcade, but that's the
no. They said it was about 24 cars.
Oh, keep going.
Okay, and so the cars, everybody's car stalled, and that's when Richard and Dan and the third man, because the third man was in the car,
yes,
saw the UFO hovering over the building.
Right.
To a point that the New York Post newspaper had to stop running because the electricity went out.
Mm.
And so they had to work on a generator. And that was the only way they could get the newspaper out. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe 10 minutes or so. But that's what happened. And as soon as their cars started up again, they were making their way down to the South Street heliport. And according to Richard, they all went onto the tarmac, and they were supposed to board helicopters to go to Governor's Island. And, that was it. But a lot of people, or a few people, came forward from the Post.
Yeah.
And they thought that, what's his name, the one that owned the Post, Rupert Murdoch.
Yes.
They thought that he was in town.
Right.
To give a sneak, to check the place out.
Sure.
They didn't know what the motorcade was, but they saw the motorcade. And some of them even saw the UFO hovering over the building, including Steve Dunleavy. He was a writer.
Yes. Oh, boy. For Fox. I remember him. Or the Post. Yeah. Well, both.
From the New York Post, yeah. Some of the truck drivers. So yeah, there were quite a few witnesses. The woman on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
There were other people in their cars on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Very much so.
And their cars stalled. That's how Janet was able to sit and
draw.
look. And I don't think she drew it at that moment, but she had a pretty good look. And she said we were all in fetal positions, the three of us in the bright white, bluish light, before we sailed up into the object. So, but I denied it. I denied it until there were so many witnesses. I just couldn't deny it anymore.
Again, Linda, you first approached Budd and he began working on researching, investigating, corroborating this account as it all came out more than 30 years ago. Neither of our memories are exactly what they used to be, but most important thing I hope some of you are getting from our conversation is you really need to read this book. It's one of the most thorough investigations and one of the most challenging. And I cannot underscore strongly enough how well verified the evidence is that Budd puts into exhibit are. There are a number of side stories here that all come together, but one of the most poignant, challenging, shocking, touching, unexplainable ones has to do with Richard. Dan and Richard their lives were changed by what they saw, as any sane persons would be. But it was Richard who became deeply obsessed with you, and it was a recognition of...
It was Dan.
Don't mind me.
Yeah.
It was Dan who came deeply obsessed with you, and it was a story that goes back in time. Can you tell us something about what I'm referring to here without my sketching about it anymore?
Well, if I could remember, Dan might have had, because I could never get that straight, an experience as a child.
Yes.
And when we were all on the big beach together, the morning of the abduction, Richard and Dan and the third man, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Dan in particular thought I was in cahoots with these aliens, these rays.
Yeah.
And from that time on, Richard had told us that he was never the same. He lost his mind, Peter.
Well, the last we were able to trace of him, he had been taken out of service.
That's right.
We do not know his final disposition, whether he's alive, whether he is not, whether he's institutionalized, or we just don't know. But I want to refer here now to a memory that ultimately did emerge of Mickey and Baby Ann. There was a time in childhood where you were brought together on a number of occasions as you got older.
That was my imaginary friend, yeah.
Yeah, a well-lit space. And you used to, you still are hardcore Yankee baseball fan, but as a kid, and I guess it was even more challenging for a girl, you were such a dedicated fan, you used to sleep in your baseball cap.
Yes.
The reason I bring it up is because when you were taken as a child, you were wearing that cap. And can you tell us a bit about what you remember in terms of you and this boy that you interfaced with?
Well,
regarding that hat, among other things?
Well, whenever I had an experience, I would meet this little boy. I don't remember whether or not I was wearing that hat, but I could never really see his face because we were in this bright white environment. And so the light behind him was shining so bright.
Yeah.
I had to hide my eyes. And even when I didn't have to hide my eyes, I couldn't see his face because his face was shadowed a lot because of the light that was behind him. And at one point, I really don't remember if I was wearing that hat.
What you might remember is your two children, you're brought together. This is strange, but for some reason you're not panicking. But he had a habit of when you were close together, and it was, I always thought of it as kind of a friendly sort of teasing, boys and girls. He would turn the bill of your hat to the side, which you did not like, and you would straighten it up again.
Well, then I did wear my hat. Yeah, I did have it on my head.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that used to annoy me. And he'd tease me. But one time he said that I reminded him of the color yellow, which I could never understand, but I said, okay. But he used to tease me and called me a baby, and, like that. And I really disliked him.
At a time when you actually were face to face with him, or with Richard, with him communicating it, did he identify himself as that little boy?
Well, he always looked familiar to me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And at that time, I didn't know that he was the one that was one of the three that was abducted along with me.
Yeah.
And then it came out. It came out that he too was abducted, and that's why he always looked so familiar to me.
Yeah.
Because I saw him on the beach. I saw him, I saw Dan, and I saw the third man, the Secretary General.
Can you imagine? There are four of you. You have had this experience together, experiencing it separately, each one of you, that you're one of the three of them, and you're on this beach, and you're there with this woman in a long nightgown, no shoes, and there is a photo, well, there are two photos that, was it Dan or Richard, took of you. It's very haunting. Again, no denying this, certainly on the part of the individuals involved. At this point, we have a few minutes to go, and I want you to kind of sum up in your own words what you feel that, what, before I do this, I promised a listener that I would ask a question. And I think I know what the answer is going to be. And as I told him, I didn't think it's the right question because, let me just first say, I've come to strongly feel that we're dealing with a myriad, a whole bunch of different civilizations, beings, intelligences, some of them corporeal, some of them interdimensional, who knows what. The ones you and I are talking about is a very narrow subset. They look a certain way, they're involved in a certain behavior, they take people, they follow bloodlines, and, they bring them back. Your mother once said something to you that I found so poignant because you never talked about her per se with alien abduction or anything like that. Can you share that moment with us? I had asked you about it the other day.
Yes, I was married about a year. I was 26 years old. And every Sunday we would go to my parents' house and have Sunday dinner. A nice, authentic Italian dinner. And I I left the kitchen and I went up through the hallway, which leads to the bathroom and the bedrooms. And my mother was in that hallway. And she pointed to my room. And she said to me, "Don't ever forget that room." And I says, "No," I says, "I haven't. It was my room." And then she took her hand and put it on the wall. She patted the wall. And she looked at me straight in the eyes and she said, "Linda, they come out from that wall." And I'll never forget it. But I didn't really understand. I thought maybe she was talking about when I was a child and we used to see ghosts in the house. She was talking about them. But what she really meant was that it was happening in the new apartment because we have moved out of the old neighborhood. Into a new neighborhood.
The question is, bearing in mind, as far as I'm concerned, there are different ones with different motivations. Here's my question for Linda. Leading abduction researchers, and the person names a series of them here, have all stated that the, quote, UFO abduction phenomena is an educational process to raise our cosmic consciousness, given the fact that Linda was floated out of a whatever floor window and into a waiting ET craft, etc. How does she feel about the cosmic consciousness analysis of these researchers?
Well, as far as the researchers, and as far as I know, they can consider that what they are doing is research. But as far as I'm concerned, all they do is argue. So there's no science there, as far as I'm concerned.
This has not been a positive experience for you. And that's the way it is for some people. And at the same time, you and I both have had the honor, pleasure, privilege of meeting so many interesting, decent people through this part of our journey in life, haven't we?
Yes, we have. And there's just so many details in the case that have not been made public.
Yeah, and maybe the future will see some of that happen.
Yeah.
I want to say again, I hope you found the show interesting, but more than anything, I hope you will read this book. The American First Edition really pissed Budd off. He had said to the artists here, as a best-selling author, major press, Simon & Schuster, I'm fine with anything on the cover except an alien or a flying saucer. And I guess they heard alien and flying saucer. Yeah, let's put that on the cover. I thought that the cover that was designed by the British press was just fine. Very powerful. It tells the story. You don't need a cartoon illustration to read it. Any closing thoughts in the last minute that we have, my friend?
Yes. From the time the case was unfolding until today, there are a lot more witnesses.
Yes.
Some of them, we don't know if they're authentic because they came forward after the book was published. So, they could have just read the book and decided they wanted to be a part of it. I don't know.
Or had the courage to then come forward, the way more people are now since the whole UFO picture has changed.
That's
in
right.
any case,
in 1996,
we are having our, I have to cut you off because we're kind of having our own missing time experience right now because we're out of it. This is Peter Robbins, my old friend and very special person in my life, Linda Cortile. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. Linda, thank you so much for joining us, and the rest of you will see you next week.
Bye-bye.